I need your help. Please subscribe to my channel. The annual company party at Sarah's marketing firm was always the kind of event that demanded attention. Glamorous, crowded, and loud, it attracted a room full of ambitious professionals eager to network over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Sarah had been with the company for 2 years, and she thrived under the constant pressure her position demanded. Her boss, Richard Caldwell, was the kind of man who commanded respect the instant he entered a room. Tall and sharply dressed, with a handshake that felt more like a subtle display of dominance. Sarah had warned me about his intensity, but I had brushed it off. I'm not flashy. I run a small carpentry shop and usually prefer staying out of the spotlight. That's exactly how I liked events like these, quietly sipping a beer while letting Sarah move effortlessly through the crowd. But Richard had other plans that evening. The venue was a modern rooftop bar with a panoramic view of city lights stretching beneath us. Sarah looked stunning in a deep navy dress, effortlessly working the room and charming colleagues with her confidence. I stayed near the edges, making small talk with a few of her coworkers about ordinary topics, local sports, nothing substantial. Then, I felt his eyes on me. Richard had noticed me from across the room. At first, I thought he was simply glancing over, but no. He walked directly toward me, glass in hand, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Sarah's husband," he said, his voice smooth but carrying something sharp, almost dismissive. "The woodworker, right?" There was that subtle condescension, as though my trade were cute, quaint, and barely worth noticing. I nodded politely. "Yeah, that's me. Nice party." He didn't stop there. Leaning slightly closer, he spoke loudly enough to attract a few curious looks. "It must be tough keeping up with someone like Sarah. Her star is really rising here." I noticed several of her colleagues shift uneasily, sensing the tension he was deliberately creating. Most people might have shrugged it off, but his smug little grin struck a nerve. Across the room, Sarah caught my eye. Her expression held a mixture of worry and silent pleading. I gave her a calm smile and took a sip of my drink, allowing him to continue. "So, what do you actually do all day? Carve tables while Sarah closes deals?" A few people laughed, assuming it was playful banter. I didn't move. I let the room's attention settle on me for a moment. Then, with an easy smile, I said, "I keep busy, but I haven't explained everything." Richard had no idea that my carpentry was more of a side venture. During the day, I worked in cybersecurity, quietly consulting for some of the top firms in the region, including, incidentally, Sarah's company. I had helped them recover from a significant server breach the previous year. My work remained completely anonymous. "Actually, Richard," I said, letting my voice carry so the small circle around us could hear, "I dabble in tech as well. Ever hear about that server breach you had last spring?" His confident smirk faltered ever so slightly. "Nasty breach," I continued casually. "Weak firewalls, outdated encryption. I know the team that helped fix it. Took them weeks to sort it out." I watched as his face tightened. He had likely claimed credit for the recovery himself, even though he barely understood the technical details. Sarah's eyes widened with alarm, silently mouthing the words, "Don't." But I had already said it, and there was no stopping the momentum now. Richard quickly tried to regain control. "Well, good thing we've got it handled now. My team's on top of everything." He clapped me on the shoulder a little too forcefully, clearly attempting to assert his dominance. I didn't flinch. "That's good to hear," I said calmly, holding his gaze. "But if you ever need a real expert, I can pass along some names. I know people who've saved companies like yours from disaster." A quiet hush settled around us. Several coworkers exchanged glances, noticing the subtle change in the atmosphere. Richard's smug grin vanished, replaced by a calculating, uncertain expression. He didn't know my full story, but he now understood I wasn't simply a quiet woodworker anymore. Sarah, sensing the growing tension, stepped in with her usual charm and redirected the conversation toward a new marketing campaign her team was preparing to launch. The crowd gradually dispersed, and Richard excused himself, muttering something about checking on the catering, but the damage had already been done. Later, while we gathered our coats, Sarah pulled me aside. "What was that?" she whispered, irritation and disbelief written across her face. I shrugged, pretending nonchalance. "Just making conversation," I said. But she wasn't convinced. "You embarrassed him in front of everyone. He's my boss, Tom." I felt a small pang of guilt. She was right. I'd allowed my ego to take control, but I couldn't help myself. He had approached me as though I were insignificant, and I wasn't willing to simply let it go. During the following week, Sarah noticed Richard becoming colder. He criticized her reports more harshly than usual and excluded her from an important meeting. She didn't directly blame me, but her frustration was obvious. I apologized and promised to stay out of her office politics from then on. To make things right, I offered to take her team out for drinks, making sure not to reveal anything about my consulting work. She agreed, but only if I promised to keep things peaceful with Richard. I laughed and swore I would, although I couldn't resist a private smirk whenever I remembered the look on Richard's face when he realized he wasn't the biggest player in the room. About a month later, I received a call from the firm's IT director, a colleague I'd worked with during the server breach. He told me Richard had been asking questions, trying to discover who I really was. Apparently, the man had become paranoid, worried that I might have damaged his reputation. I told him to stay quiet. I had no interest in the spotlight, but it was satisfying knowing Richard was sweating, wondering exactly how much I knew. Sarah's career continued to thrive despite my little stunt, and she even earned a promotion a few months later. Richard, however, became much more cautious at company events from that point forward. Looking back, maybe I should have ignored his comments, but there was a certain satisfaction in watching someone who believed he was untouchable realize that he wasn't. Sarah and I remain solid, and I've learned to keep my double life discreet whenever I attend her work events. Still, I keep my ears open because if Richard ever decides to test me again, I'll be ready.